Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Immunicast. Today, we have an incredible guest that gives us the honor to and the opportunity to speak to him. He is Karl Stanley. How are you, Karl?
I'm doing all right, thank you.
Great, great. And just a little bit of introduction for our audience. Karl Stanley is a submarine pilot, one of the most experienced in the world. He created the Royal Italian Institute for Deep Sea Exploration. He has done explorations in the Blue Hole in Belize with Sir Richard Branson. He has done more than 7,000 hours of submarine exploration. He has done dives for National Geographic, for Animal Planet, for the Discovery Channel, which makes him one of the greatest explorers of our time, exploring the deep seas and all its mysteries. So today we have the opportunity to talk to him and to do a little bit of exploration on your life. So my first question would be, how did your passion start, and how did this sense of deep sea exploration begin?
I think I've always been very curious. People my whole life, especially when I was a child, were telling me that I asked too many questions. I remember when I was like in second grade or something, I was very curious about where the storm water went in the drainage. And I tried to crawl through there and find, but I could only get so far. And then I went to the town hall and asked to see the records of where the water went. And in addition to exploring under the water, I've also done a great deal of exploration in the jungles on the mainland, in parts of
Great.
Bonito National Park where people haven't been. So I just, I think maybe exploration is something I was born with.
And if you started at a young age, how was the support from your parents? Did they understand what you?
Yeah, I mean, with the submarine, it started at age 9 that I said I was gonna build a sub. And then when I physically started construction at 15, which is when I was old enough to have a job and earn money to put towards it, they were supportive because they thought that I was learning a good skill in welding, but I don't think they ever thought that it was going to be something I was going to be taking deep into the ocean. And then when I first started diving it, they were quite apprehensive. But after it kind of proved itself to work, they were less so. And both my parents and my sister, they've all been multiple times.
Great, great. Yeah, I imagine that the first time it would be scary for them.
Yeah.
Great. And
my dad was particularly scared. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
And when you started to build your first submarine, I imagine you didn't have much resources to do it. What materials do you use, and how
it was made out of steel? I did all my welding. Everything was relatively less expensive then. We're talking in the 80s, and I was already making over $5 an hour. So if you scale it, it actually wasn't that bad compared to the cost of steel, the cost of batteries, the cost of stainless steel fasteners. I mean, some of those things have been going up 10, 20% a year. I really don't believe the official inflation rates compared to where the wages people have made compared to what things have cost. But I built that first submarine for only about $20,000. I actually was keeping track of every dollar I spent, right down to, paper towels and paintbrushes. I literally had that working for right at $20,000.
Wow, wow. And
Yeah.
how about the expertise, the calculations, and everything that goes into building this? You were 15 when you started. How did you manage to learn everything you needed to learn?
Well, there are a few good books out there. One, Man Submersibles by Frank Busby, that was incredibly informative. Without that book, I'm sure I couldn't have done it. I also went and physically met with other people that were experts. For example, Doug Privet, that made the Delta Gamma subs. He was very helpful. Basically, the whole manned submersible industry was going through a strange time there too, where previously the number one driver for these kind of vehicles was oil and gas work, and that had basically been replaced by robots, and government funding for manned underwater exploration was already diminishing. And basically the people that had the most information and experience kind of thought their entire industry was a dying thing. And so a teenager coming to them curious, they were happy that somebody wanted to know it, and extremely helpful.
Wow, wow. At what age did you actually do your first dive, to test if everything you've done really worked?
Yeah. So it was basically about 8 years from when I started making it to when I first dove it. And the first dive was the same week that I graduated college in Florida, Eckerd College. And it actually made the first dive the same, right on campus.
How was the perception back then? Did people know you were doing this?
I didn't realize at that point that it was going to turn into a career, or that I was going to be taking tourists. There wasn't any deep water submarine tourism at that point. So it was, I was just following through with an idea that I had when I was 9 years old, and this is kind of where it led to.
Yeah. And how did it feel personally, that first dive, and feeling that you survived it?
I mean, it was a very slow progression. The first couple times it touched water, it was still connected to a crane, and then there was some considerable modification. And then the first dive that had nothing connecting it to the surface, there were still scuba divers standing by, and I was only in 15 feet of water. And then it was a very, very steady progression. So, I mean, there wasn't like a giant aha moment where,
Yeah.
we have liftoff. It was bit by bit by bit.
Okay. And do you ever feel nervous that something could go wrong, or that you could be in danger at any point? And how did you manage that?
Well, I've had enough faith in the knowledge that I had gained, and I felt that I had done my homework to a large enough extent. Looking back now, there's things that I did when I was younger that I would not do again. For example, the first time I went to 90 feet, I was in a channel that had a strong current and terrible visibility, not even 2 feet of visibility. And there was also ships overhead, and it was an incredibly unsafe situation for diving compared to anything I do now. But it was the only thing that deep without driving across the state of Florida. So that was the stepping stone. I had been to 30 feet, and then that was 90 feet. And then to go to 200 feet, I had to drive across the state. So, I don't think that I look back at that now and think, wow, that was really not so bright of me. But
I think that's something good about being young to do things that might be risky but can push humanity forward. Your first dives were in the United States, and I know now that you live in Honduras, in Roatan. And so how did that came to be? How
I had done an entire summer of diving on the east coast of Florida, around the Fort Lauderdale area, where the water gets the deepest, closest to shore. And I had the first submarine on display at a dive show called Ocean Fest. And it was there that I met the owners of a resort that is now closed, that used to be about 2 miles from here, called the Inalast Resort. And basically, the owners from there, they said, Roatan is the perfect spot to operate a submersible. Just come down and see it with your own eyes. You'll understand. And yeah, I came down, and within 1 hour, I agreed with them and, said this was the perfect spot to operate a sub, which it is. I haven't found anything that compares to it. And that was right before Hurricane Mitch. And while I was up in the States packing things up, Hurricane Mitch hit Honduras, and there was no communications on the island for a few days. And friends of mine were telling me, like, you're going to have to change your plans. Honduras is wiped out. And when they got communications back, and I found out that this particular part of Roatan was not really that badly affected, I went ahead and came down.
Great. After you came to Honduras and you started your activities with your submarines. Did you start right away with public dives, or did you do more scientific research?
I had already done 49 dives in Florida, and my first dive in Honduras and my first dive with paying customers, that was dive number 50. Well, one customer, because it only carried myself, one person.
Absolutely amazing how you developed from a kid who had a dream at a very young age to move into Central America and starting doing this amazing exploration with a submarine you actually built yourself. Yeah, and now maybe we can focus more on the experiences that you have had in your submarine. I've seen some previous interviews of yours and some footage of you being down with your submarine, and let me tell you that you seem amazed every time of what you see. And I imagine that you have seen a lot of the fish and a lot of the ecosystem that you have come to know it pretty well. Does that reflect your passion for what you do? Do you always feel so amazed when you go in every trip?
I mean, my sense of amazement is not what it was 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. Most of what I'm seeing down there, I've now seen a lot. For example, on my last dive, we saw both a Dumbo octopus and a shark, a 6-gill shark that was larger than a submarine. When you have encounters like that, there's far fewer people that have seen a Dumbo octopus than have seen a tiger or a panda bear in face to face in human history, by far. Same thing with 6-gill sharks. Very few people have ever seen one, and they're actually probably the most abundant large wild animal left on our planet. So when you're so close to an animal that so few people get to see, I mean, there is a sense of appreciation and wonder, and of course your passengers. Most of my customers, they're coming to Roatan specifically to go in the sub, and they fully, I mean, they appreciate what it is they're doing. And I mean, so then there's the aspect of sharing an experience like that with people that they realize this is their once in a lifetime opportunity to see things like that. I mean, there's a lot of different elements to it, but I mean, the initial thrill of seeing something that I didn't know existed 15 or 20 years ago, and now I know exactly what it is, and I've seen it 100 times. It's a different experience, but it's still, I feel very privileged to be down there and have these experiences for sure.
Have you ever discovered a new species?
At least half a dozen.
Wow.
There's actually,
really?
Yeah, including 2 fish and 2 or 3 mollusks. Mollusks are actually the second most numerous group of animals, second only to insects. It's really not that hard to discover a new species of mollusk, but to scientifically describe a new species, you have to be a expert and know enough to write a scientific paper that gets accepted by your peers, and also have a physical specimen. It's I think only a few times where a species has been described new only off of photos or video. They really want a physical specimen to be in a museum that can be DNA analysis, dissected, studied under the microscope to really show why it's something new. So, for example, with the fish, I had to have a whole apparatus on the front of the sub that squirted poison at the fish and then sucked it into a holding tank so that you could get the physical fish back to the surface for the scientists to not only analyze, but then deposit in a museum as the holotype, is what they call the first one of a new species. So it's not just seeing it, you have to physically collect it and also have an expert or be the expert to write the scientific paper that actually establishes it as a new species.
Wow. I didn't know that. I didn't know how the procedure was. And do you work with scientists a lot? I imagine.
Once or twice a year. Not as much, actually. It's been diminishing because public funding for science has been declining, and there's also now a growing number of billionaires that have submarines on their yachts that invite scientists at no cost to themselves, so they can have a tax write-off and say that they're doing scientific research on what is more or less their pleasure yacht.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but that's amazing to be able to explore, and that you actually have contributed to the discovery of new species with all the work that you've done there. That's absolutely incredible. And in this interactions that you have had with National Geographic, the Discovery Channel, and many other groups, and and maybe talking about how you met Stockton Rush from Oceangate's Titan. Did that came to be through those connections of exploration or building or
I don't remember exactly when Stockton and I met. We had about 100 emails back and forth over 10 years, and since the implosion, I read through them all. We both used to go to the same conference every year in New Orleans called Underwater Intervention, which is essentially people doing things in the deep ocean. Also, Oceangate's second submersible, Antipodes, was upcycled from another sub built in 1973 that had done offshore oil work in the North Sea. And part of my passenger sphere was also formerly part of that same sub. So there was another connection there that we would have been well aware of each other.
Yeah. Have you met James Cameron in those conferences by any chance?
I saw him speak at a film festival in Monterey, but I haven't formally met him.
Okay. You had known Stockton Rice for a long time, a decade long.
Yeah.
And
no, I had considered him a friend. I'd been on 2 submarine dives with him, including the second deep dive of Titan. I've been to his house. I met his family. He let me drive his car. Anytime that we were at the conference together, we would go out for meals together. So
and how deep did you go in the second dive?
Something like 12,500 feet. We were basically trying to test it for Titanic depth, and I think we were maybe 400 feet shallower than the Titanic when we turned back.
And did you turn back because of anything that particularly scared you, or just because that was your aim?
From what I recall, the bottom was sloping very gently, and we would have had to keep driving, basically in the interest of time.
Oh, okay. And how was that dive? Did you ever feel that anything was wrong, or that you could be in danger at any point?
So he told us ahead of time that it was going to make loud noises, which he compared to fireworks ahead of time, based off his previous experience of doing one dive by himself. And sure enough, when we started getting deeper, the sub was making loud noises, which was the carbon fiber bands breaking, which I compared to small caliber gunshots. And yeah, it was unnerving when you're down there and you're hearing those kind of sounds. But it's a completely different dynamic with 4 people versus being in there by yourself, or being the captain versus being a pilot. It was a new experience for me, and there are a couple things that in retrospect are indicators that he knew there was much greater risk than he was letting on. One of them is, that sub was for 5 people, but there was only 4 of us in there. And there were 100 people waiting on shore that some of them would have paid a lot of money to be in there with us, but he didn't want a 5th person. I think he knew that
it could go wrong.
Wasn't right. That, it shouldn't be making noises like that.
Yeah.
And he tried to play it cool that it was no big deal. But when he had been down there by himself, he was not able to isolate where the breaking sounds were coming from. And when the 4 of us were in there, after a while, I identified an exact spot where the sounds were coming from, which it's and the other big indicator was he offered the controller to me to drive. He didn't offer that to the other passengers, and the other 2 passengers really didn't have any submersible experience. One was a 20-something-year-old technician from a sonar company, and the other one was a childhood friend of his that was an executive in the company, but had no real background with submersibles. I believe now that he gave me the controller because he realized I had the most awareness of the situation we were in, and he kind of wanted me to be in control of my own destiny if we were to live or die.
Wow.
I remember too that the sounds were regular enough that the bottom was very gently sloping, and looking out that window, you couldn't exactly, it was a little bit distorting. It had a convex exterior, so it's a little bit hard, the optics of it, and I didn't need to pay attention to the compass. I could literally drive towards deeper water by which way were the breaking sounds getting louder and more frequent.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you knew in the spot that that was breaking, that something was breaking.
It was definitely, the thing is that at that time I had no reason to believe, and I did not realize that he was capable of flat out lying. Since the implosion, I've seen stories. Well, for example, the fact that he would take people's money and then refuse to return it when he failed to deliver on what he had promised, or the fact that he grossly overstated his relationships with Boeing and NASA and University of Washington. Like, I had no way of knowing for sure that he was that kind of untruthful person. So when he told me things like, I've done enough model testing, you don't know what you're talking about, I've studied this much more than you have, I had no reason to believe that he was just lying to me. And all the evidence I see now is he never even tested it more than 10% over pressure.
So you, when you take the control of the Titan, did you you were still going down, or were you already going up, or did you decide?
It was when we reached the bottom, and then he let me drive it along the bottom into deeper water.
Okay. And did you ever say, when you were with him 12,000 feet underwater, we should go up because this, if it's breaking, this could implode, or we could die here?
I didn't. So one of the more disturbing parts about the dive was that it was still making noise on the way back up, even as shallow as 300 feet, which it took me, I didn't want to like panic or rush to my judgment of him. But after that dive, I wrote him email that I spent a lot of time choosing my wording, and then there was follow-up emails over the course of, I want to say, a couple months. And I told him that it sounded like the hull was decaying in one area, and that the only question in my mind was if the failure was going to be catastrophic or survivable, but it was going to fail. And more than anything, even if he thought it wasn't going to fail, he did not have a marketable product, because you could not charge people to be in a submarine that was making those kinds of noises and not expect that one out of the 4 passengers would start freaking out and demand to go back to the surface.
Yeah,
And in addition to that, he also had extremely little experience. He was willing to actually start taking paying passengers into the middle of the North Atlantic on deep dive number 5. And I don't even think he had a single dive that had not had a major system failure. So I also made the point to him, if you're charging somebody 6 figures and you get down there and this breaks or that breaks, and they only get a glimpse of the Titanic, or like, what's your refund policy?
Yeah.
And he basically changed that later to, you don't get a refund, period. You only get a chance of doing it again the next year. And, you're stuck out at sea for 10 days on a boat. It's not exactly, I mean, for some of these very wealthy people, being 10 days in the middle of nowhere on a boat is not something to be taken lightly. And, I've also read since then that of the missions that he went out there, he only had a 14% success rate as measured by people that are paying to see the Titanic actually seeing the Titanic. I mean, even without the engineering side and the morality of putting people's lives at risk, from a sheer business standpoint, like, why are you going to promise somebody something that you're only delivering 14%
of the time?
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
And he just laughed it off as being like, well, I'm innovating. The fact that I'm failing so much is showing that I'm trying. Like, that's not, what other business, what other business would not work?
But
I can't think of a single one.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's incredible. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And I imagine that you with more than 7,000 hours of exploration, you might have had scary times. Have you ever experienced anything?
Of course. I'll say this though. The most afraid I've ever been in either one of my submarines have both involved being on the surface and bad weather, and in danger of getting smashed up on the reef. I mean, that's pretty much a nightmare scenario. And also statistically, submersibles, the most dangerous time for them is on the surface. Exactly the same that small airplanes have the vast majority of their fatal crashes takeoff and landing. Like, in the air, they're pretty all right. It's that problem of coming into the ground. Yeah. Same thing with sub, getting in and out of the water.
And is this the Titan was the first to implode, the first submarine, or have there been any other implosions in the past?
First submersible. There have been implosions, but they've all been military vehicles. And anytime you have, first of all, it's much larger and there's more moving parts and more joints, and it's a much more complicated machine. I read that the Seawolf submarine that the U.S. made was, in terms of the number of parts, the most complicated piece of machinery that any humans had ever made. Like, more so than the space station or any other machine. So if you have that complicated of a vehicle, of course, the odds of, all you need is 1 point of failure.
Yeah.
But also the fact that it's a weapon and you have explosives on board, a good number of the military submarine implosions have for sure involved ordnance that went off prematurely, or there was some kind of problem with the nuclear reactor. These are not factors when it comes to a submersible. The fact that this vehicle failed as it did is, you go beyond gross negligence. I mean, is, I honestly feel at this point, he might have even been designing it to fail in this way. All he had to do was test it a little, listen to the experts, test it over 20%, 30%, make more models, figure out exactly, like, I see no evidence that he actually did anything that could be perceived as due diligence here.
Yeah. And it's for someone to build a submarine like that, and and to be experimenting with those new materials and these designs that were not totally tested. How did he not know that he was putting himself in danger? Do you?
Well, the investigation is involving 4 countries, and they're already saying that it's going to take 1 to 2 years. So there's a lot that's going to come out that we don't know yet. But honestly, to ask those questions, he clearly wasn't stupid.
Yeah.
The fact that he built an airplane, it was a kit, but I mean, he put it all together and then flew it. You're not going to survive doing those 2 things if you're a complete moron.
Yeah.
I don't think that he was that bad of an engineer or lacked common sense and reasoning powers. At some point, the fact that he changed the name to Titan in 2018, which is also the name of a book that was written about the Titanic 14 years before the Titanic existed, like it's kind of creepy.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you're aware or watched that Ace video, but there was this book, and 14 years prior, and the ship was 800 something feet, same as the Titanic, left England, hit an iceberg on its maiden voyage, and sank because of the captain's negligence. And then that actually happened, and people are coming to the author and being like, how the heck did you write a book that, what are you, Nostradamus? Like, what's going on? Why did you change the name of your submersible to the name of that book? It's like he was trying to wrap himself into the mythology of the Titanic wreck, which he loved saying was, there's 3 words that people know anywhere in the world: Coca-Cola, God, and Titanic. And now he is part of that legacy. And also, I think it was only by accident, but he was married to a direct descendant of one of the most wealthy, famous people to die in the Titanic wreck. And so this is like another layer that he just got entrapped in, the idea of, going down. He actually literally physically went out with the biggest bang possible, and murdered 2 billionaires at the same time.
So let me get this right. The name of the Titan wasn't Titan in the first place. So it had another name.
Being Cyclops too.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And he changed it in 2018, which is also when he was under the most legal and financial pressure. Did you read the New Yorker article? Yeah. This is when his engineer was suing him. This is when that was the year he was supposed to dive already, but he delayed it. It was in 2018 that I went down with him in the Bahamas. And even despite those noises, he still wanted to push ahead. But then the pandemic also set him back. But, my understanding is he had more than $100 million of shares in the company issued.
Yeah.
People are saying this is about his greed, but he, even charging $250,000 a person, he's never making a profit from what he was doing. He wasn't even keeping up with expenses. I mean, 10 years of research and development, and with that much staff, and that boat, every time he took it out, that was millions of dollars. Those boats are crazy expensive. This was all his motivation the entire time, was about his ego. It wasn't even about money. He was born into money. He didn't need the money. It was all about ego.
Wow. And yeah, this entire story just blows my mind. Every aspect of it, every detail that comes out, it's mind blowing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
the exact term that somebody from a documentary company that I was speaking to yesterday, they said they had never had their mind blown like this. Like, this is a crazy story. It's going to be, I mean, he really did write himself into the history books in a way that's going to be pretty much impossible to top.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Before ending this amazing conversation, wow, Karl, your stories are amazing. I mean, everything you've done in your life, it's incredible, and the stories that you're associated with, it's amazing. The life of an explorer, definitely. But before we close this conversation, I would like to, if you're okay with it, to ask to ask you some of the questions that some listeners of our podcast and YouTube have for you. The first question is, what is your case for submarine public tourism? What would be your case for this kind of tourism?
Why should there be
the
public to see the largest ecosystem on our planet? Would that be another way of rephrasing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you, people love to throw around the statistic that it's a blue planet and 70% of the Earth is covered by ocean. But if you actually think about it in terms of volume of living area, more than 90% of the planet is ocean so deep it's never seen the sunlight. The average depth of the ocean is 14,000 feet. And it starts getting totally dark at around 1,700, 1,800 feet. Most birds, insects rarely go more than maybe 1,000 feet above wherever the ground is. So more than 90% of the entire living area of our planet is water so deep it's never seen the sunlight. And I am the number one spot where I don't want to say average person, because it's the average person never even steps foot on an airplane. 80% of people have never been on an airplane. So it's already a privilege even to be on a plane, let alone a submarine. But, I think it's of value that people have the ability to see that 90% of our planet with their own eyes. And also the people that study it. I mean, I've had a large number of scientists that either very early or late in their career, and almost all the studying they're going to be doing is specimens and videotape. And they never physically are there themselves and see it with their own eyes. Just giving somebody the opportunity to do that for a relatively cost-effective way, I think is of value. And I feel very privileged to be down there myself. And, there's 100 species that I've spent more time observing than anybody that's lived before. So
yeah,
I find value in that.
Yeah, that reminds me of a philosophical exercise. It's a philosophy exercise that talks about what would it be to study colors for all your life without actually seeing the colors, and know every aspect of it, every sound, every wavelength, and everything there is to know about it. If you go out and open your eyes and see the colors for yourself, if that would teach you something new, and I think this, and I agree with that you would actually experience something new and greater than just learning the data. And another question is, do you need a particular physical preparation for going to the depth of the oceans as astronauts do for space?
Not really. I've had elderly people, handicapped people, babies, almost 10 dogs. Pretty much all you have to be able to do is go through the hatch and yeah.
Great. This last one would be, would you ever consider going to the Mariana Trench?
I mean, they're selling trips there right now.
Really? I didn't know that.
Victor Vescova in the limiting factor submarine. I want to say it's something like $2 or $3 million to go, and there are diminishing returns the deeper you go in the ocean. I want to say maybe around 10,000 feet. There's no longer sharks. Remember, the average is 14,000. The Marianas Trench is, I want to say, 36,000. When you get another depth, there's no more fish. So it's, I think people going to the bottom of the Marianas Trench is very much like people going to the Titanic. You want to be able to brag to your friends. The number one reason that you're going there, you want to be able to tell people that you did it.
Yeah.
So, I don't think if that's your number one motivation, that is a fantastic motivation.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And this is a question from myself. This is a personal question. I'm actually a little bit anxious. I'm an anxious person. I think about death a lot, and so how do you manage in your explorations to deal with the idea of fear, of risk, and what do you think for your in your mind when you're facing things that could be very risky or life-threatening?
I think probably different people are wired differently.
Yeah.
Like, I've been in near-death situations and mountaineering scenarios. I did 49 skydives, and I think probably my thresholds for fear and adrenaline are not anywhere near average.
Yeah. Just to close our conversation, what will you tell people, young people that wish to pursue their dreams in life and their passions in life? What would you tell them as an advice?
I mean, in my case, being persistent and dedicated paid off, and I didn't really see where it was leading to, or even have an example to use as, there was nobody doing deep sea tourism when I started making my submarine. So, to some extent, if you have faith and just keep at something, for me, it's worked out all right. I can't say that. On the other hand, I meet people regularly now that are the same age as me or a few years younger, and they took a government job and they're retired with a pension and health care, which I have neither of. So, I mean, maybe I didn't make the right choice. I feel that I've had a rewarding life. But, there's also something to be said for working for a company and having a pension and health care. Yeah, everybody's got to choose their own path.
Yeah, we are as you said before, we are wired differently.
Exactly.
Yeah, great. Karl, this has been an amazing conversation. We have talked and covered a lot, and I would like to thank you for this opportunity to talk to you. And I wish you the best of luck in everything you do. And I can assure you from another perspective that your life is amazing, and you can be totally sure about that, and that your life has been meaningful, very meaningful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Goodbye.
All right. Thank you.